Inflation has been a hot topic in the business and financial world for about 2 years now. And the reason for that is because inflation has been heating up. And we have had experts on both sides of the aisle talking about how inflation is getting worse. And sometimes they've even said that inflation isn't really that big of a deal. In fact, our country has gone from the Federal Reserve saying that inflation is completely transitory, not that big a deal, to our President of the United States saying supply chain issues and inflation, no big deal. All the way to the end of 2021, where the Federal Reserve has now admitted that inflation is no longer transitory and they need to retire that term. But there have been others who have been talking about inflation a lot. One of those people who have been talking about this big inflation problem in our country is former President Donald Trump. Donald Trump sat down with Fox Business the other day to talk about all of the inflation issues, and he essentially said that inflation is snowballing and is now worse than it has ever been. And some of the key problems for that is our rising energy costs. So today I wanted to react to this article from Fox Business and kind of talk a little bit about inflation and Trump's thoughts about inflation in general. But before I get into all of that, my name is Nate from Minority Mindset News, and if you like this video, then smash that thumbs up button below and hit that notification bell too. That way YouTube shows our videos to way more money minds around the world, and we can keep making videos just like this one. So let's jump right into the article here. Former President Donald Trump says inflation is a big problem right now and is citing energy costs as the largest problem that our country is facing in 2022. And the reason Trump believes that energy is our biggest problem right now is because all of the things that need energy in order to function. He's talking about our supply chain, and he mentions specifically that everything from the beginning of our supply chain to the end relies on energy. And he's saying that President Joe Biden right now is not doing a lot to lower energy costs and help out the average American. A direct quote from Trump here says that if you have a bakery, if you have anything, you have to heat it, you have to use the machinery. All of that uses energy. In addition, there is trucks and airplanes for transportation. All of those use energy too, from fueling to creating those transportation vehicles. But we all know the price of things is starting to go up right now. But when Trump says that inflation is worse than it's ever been, what exactly is he referring to? Well, he's referring to the most recent Labor Department report that showed our consumer price index is actually starting to go up. According to the November Consumer Price Index, inflation for all industries, which means the prices for everything in those industries, went up by an average of around 6.8%. That's higher than the 6.2% that we saw in October and higher than the 5% that we saw in September. And in general, inflation is now at its highest point in around 40 years. We haven't seen inflation this high since around 1982. So that is the average for all industries in the United States. Now, obviously, you're going to have some outliers where some industries actually rose much higher than 6.8, and you'll have some other outliers where inflation rose much lower than 6.8%. But Trump here is talking specifically about energy. And energy, according to this article, went up by around 3.5% in November. More specifically, gasoline prices went up by 58.1%. The average gallon of gas costs you $1 more than it did at this time last year. Now, as of December 20th, 2021, crude oil prices actually dropped by around 5% in the United States to around $67 per barrel. And there are a couple different reasons for this. For one, we have the Omicron variant. Now, this new variant of the virus actually has been scaring investors for a little while now. And it's been scaring other markets and industries because they are very afraid of what happened back in 2020. They don't want economic lockdowns because that means more stimulus, and it could mean people being out of work, which may hurt inflation even more. And the Omicron variant is spreading. Now, we still don't really know a lot about this new variant, if it is much more deadly than some of the other variants, but we do know that it spreads very fast. As of December 21st, 2021, 73% of all new virus cases were the Omicron variant. So that is going to hurt demand because as businesses start to shut down, as events start getting shut down, as people start traveling less, gasoline prices are eventually going to drop as well. We saw this happen back in March and April of 2020 and even into the summer of last year as well. In fact, gas prices ended up trading at negative levels. something we have never seen in the history of that industry. Suppliers were literally paying people to take that crude oil off of their hands. And number two, President Joe Biden actually took out around 50 million barrels of oil from our United States reserves. This has helped to alleviate some of the pressure off of gas and other industries. Now, former President Donald Trump has two problems with President Joe Biden taking out 50 million barrels from our United States reserves. His first problem is that the United States is supposed to use this oil in times of war. The second problem is that President Joe Biden shut down some pipeline projects, which has caused some of that oil to not be able to be created and transported throughout the United States. Now, I will say some of those oil pipelines were not specifically designed for the United States. The United States would see some revenue and eventually start seeing oil from that, but they're actually just going through the United States to carry oil to other places. And a lot of experts have argued that that oil that is in the reserves can be used for anything. It's not specifically designed for war, it's designed for any crisis that the United States is facing. And Joe Biden believes that our gas and oil problem is a national crisis right now. And this oil and gas problem goes a little bit deeper than just the President of the United States. Most of the oil that the United States gets is from the OPEC organization. OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And the fact of the matter is, most of the oil that the United States and the rest of the world uses is found in the Middle East and Middle Eastern countries. Meaning that oil needs to literally be drilled and refined and then taken back over to the United States so it can be turned into a useful material for people to use, such as gasoline. That became a little bit of a problem back in 2020 though, because there was such low demand for gasoline, nobody was driving. This sent the price of gas to new record lows, but it also meant that these oil giants were not getting any money. So OPEC decided to stop and pull back a lot of its oil producing. If there's not really a need for oil, then OPEC can't exactly make companies start producing more oil. They would start losing a ton of money and they would eventually go under. In addition, storing oil can be a problem. Countries already have millions upon millions of barrels just sitting around. And like in 2020, they were not using that much of it. So now if you continue to produce more, you have to find new places to store it. Oil is a physical thing. You have to put it somewhere. So oil production eventually dropped. It began picking back up as more people started to travel again and as more people started to go back to work. As we have started to see more and more people go back to work and travel and all of our airline industries starting to actually make a profit again, we need to produce more oil. And that's not an easy thing, especially with all of our supply chain issues. This oil needs to be transported across the ocean in order to get to the United States. And we have a ton of other cargo ships trying to get into the United States right now as well. So that is not an easy thing. But what about American oil producers? We have a ton of oil producers in the Gulf of Mexico and along our coasts. So why exactly does the United States rely on a lot of other countries for its oil? Well, this is a complicated and kind of a political answer. For one, the United States does have a lot of oil reserves. However, some of those oil reserves can't actually be refined just yet. And the fact of the matter is the United States and what the United States owns is not comparable to what the Middle East has in terms of oil. And we do actually make a ton of oil in the United States and use a lot of our own supply. However, because of a lot of natural disasters that happened earlier this year, a lot of those supply lines got cut off. And that meant that they got behind. Just like the rest of the world, they got behind. And now we are starting to pick up our oil production. However, it's not going to happen overnight. So anything that needs oil is going to be behind for a long time. And things are going to continue to get further behind if demand continues to rise and supply continues to drop. So like I said, the price of just about everything is going up right now, but it is not just limited to energy. Home prices are going up, car prices are going up, and just about anything that you can find on a shelf is going up in price too. So what exactly is going on with that situation? Well, one of the reasons why inflation is so high right now is because we have supply chain issues. I touched on this just a little bit ago, but suppliers can't get enough things on shelves to meet the demand of the American public. That means that just about any time our shelves are full, Americans are buying everything, and then they have to be restocked. This means that there is not enough supply to go around. So some people aren't getting things that they need, but also prices are starting to go way up. Inflation basically means that your monetary supply is expanding. So the Federal Reserve is printing a lot more money, and the reason they've printed so much money over the last 2 years is because of the pandemic. When everything shut down with economic lockdowns and social distancing orders, that meant that businesses couldn't get any money. And if businesses can't get any money, they can't exactly pay their employees. And if businesses start losing money hand over fist, then you're going to start seeing people get laid off and fired, which is exactly what happened. Unemployment reached a new rate of around 15% back in 2020. That is the highest unemployment level we've seen since the Great Depression. So the Federal Reserve increased our monetary supply by providing stimulus to just about every American. A lot of this stimulus was in the form of checks. We also had unemployment assistance on a federal level, paycheck protection loans, and of course, quantitative easing on Wall Street. So you had trillions of dollars that were being poured into the United States economy, and ultimately that is going to increase inflation. As the American public was getting all of this money, they started to spend a lot of money. A lot of this money was spent on goods and services that are now in short supply. And that meant that the price of everything was going to go up. If you want something, you have to now pay more of it because there's just not a lot of it to go around. And initially that lifted our economy out of a recession. It was the fastest we've ever gone out of a recession in American history. However, it also caused massive inflation. And remember, all of this money printing was done back in 2020. Parts of it were done in 2021, but most of it was on stimulus measures of 2020. And President Trump was the president in 2020 and signed off on a lot of these bills that made the Federal Reserve print trillions of dollars. Now, what I will say here is that inflation is a problem in the United States. However, all of this money printing really did help out a lot of people initially. The problem with inflation, though, is it doesn't hurt people right away. It hurts people after all of the money is printed and after all of the money is spent. Ultimately, all of that money printing is going to hurt the average American because the majority of Americans don't know how to protect themselves against inflation. We measure our success in how much money we can spend. So if you make $100,000, our culture says you can spend $100,000. However, the problem with that is that every single year, things start to get more expensive. According to the Federal Reserve, a healthy level of inflation is around 2 to 3% every single year. That means that the buying power and the value of your money is going down by 2 to 3% every single year. So if something costs $1 today, 1 year from now, it might cost you around $1.02 or 3 cents. It doesn't sound like a lot, but give it 20, 30, or 40 years, that one thing that costs $1 is now going to cost you $3 or $4. The price of things goes up over time because wages need to increase and supply chain issues happen all throughout the world. And that is something that the President of the United States has no control over, whether it's President Trump or President Biden. Inflation is going to happen. That's why we always talk about being smart with your money today so that you can prepare for tomorrow. But getting back to the matter of inflation, supply chain issues are causing most of the inflation that we're facing right now, and a lot of the money printing is also contributing to inflation. Now, what exactly can we do about inflation? Well, one of the things that can be done about inflation is for the Federal Reserve to step in and pull back a lot of its stimulus. In December of 2021, they announced that they were going to do just this. They were pulling their quantitative easing, which is when they buy bonds and treasury notes on Wall Street, back by around $30 billion every single month, and will completely exit the market by sometime in spring of 2022. In addition, they have announced that they're going to raise interest rates around around 3 times in 2022. They lowered interest rates back in 2020 to get people to spend money. They wanted people to be incentivized to go out and get a loan, like a car loan and a mortgage loan. However, this also made houses and new cars very scarce. And as you can imagine, the price of those things went up. By December of 2021, the average price of a home went up by around 20% when compared to 2019. All of that is in an effort to lower demand. People won't have as much money, so they can't go out and spend money if they don't have it. The only thing that they're going to be buying is things that they absolutely need, which could make our economy shrink, but our economy could be overinflated right now. So even though there might be some negative side effects of that, it will lower inflation for the long term. The Federal Reserve still believes that inflation is going to be a bit higher in 2022. They estimate that it's going to be at around 2.6%, which is way lower than it is right now and still within a healthy mark. However, all of that does not help Americans right now. Americans are still spending a lot more money than they used to for all of the same things. All of those things include groceries and gas prices. Most economists and former President Trump believe that things are going to get way worse before they get better. But if inflation is really here to stay has yet to be seen. It really depends on what goes on with this new Omicron variant. If our economy shuts back down, then you're probably going to see a lot of the same issues pop back up like you did in 2020 and in 2021. However, if our pandemic starts to go away, then that means the stock market is going to boom and the Federal Reserve can pull back a lot of its stimulus because our economy can naturally recover. People will be spending less, but we have spent an all-time high in 2020 and in 2021. So for the Federal Reserve, that might be a good thing. But now I want to hear from you on this issue. What do you think about former President Trump's thoughts about inflation? Do you think that he's right? Inflation is worse than it has ever been and it's only going to get bigger in 2022? Or do you think that our nation is taking the right steps to drop inflation and it's going to be lower in 2022? Whatever your thoughts are, leave a comment below before you go. But that is it for today's business and financial news breakdown. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button below. Keep hustling, money minds, and I'll see you all in the next one.